someone graduates with $30,000 in student loans. They enroll in an income-driven repayment plan, make every single payment on time for 5 straight years, never miss one, never pay late. They check their loan balance, expecting to see meaningful progress. Instead, the number is $32,000, higher than when they started, despite 5 years of consistent, responsible payments. This isn't a system error, and it isn't a sign that they did something wrong. It's the predictable, mathematically inevitable result of how certain repayment plans interact with interest, and understanding the mechanism behind it changes what making payments actually means for a large share of student loan borrowers. It's a genuinely disorienting thing to experience, doing exactly what you're told to do, on schedule, without a single missed payment, and still watching the number climb, as if the effort simply isn't registering anywhere in the system meant to track it. Student loan repayment gets discussed as if any consistent payment schedule should steadily whittle down a balance over time, the same intuitive way paying off a credit card or car loan works. And for many standard repayment plans, that intuition holds up reasonably well. But according to data published by the Department of Education and research from organizations tracking federal student loan repayment outcomes, a significant share of borrowers enrolled specifically in income-driven repayment plans, ones that calculate monthly payments based on income rather than the loan balance itself, see their loan balances grow rather than shrink for years or even decades, a pattern directly tied to how these specific plans calculate required monthly payments relative to accruing interest. This distinction rarely gets explained clearly at the moment someone actually enrolls, which means many borrowers only discover the mechanism years into repayment. At the exact moment, they check a balance expecting progress and find the opposite instead. Let's start with the basic mechanics of how income-driven repayment plans actually calculate a monthly bill, because the calculation method is fundamentally different from standard amortizing loan. A standard loan payment is calculated backward from a target payoff date, structured specifically to cover both the interest accruing that month and a portion of the original principal, guaranteeing the balance decreases with every on-time payment. An income-driven payment, by contrast, is calculated as a percentage of the borrower's discretionary income, typically somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the specific plan, with no reference to the loan balance or the interest accruing on it all. The technical process works like this. The loan servicer calculates a fixed dollar payment based purely on income and family size. That payment gets applied first to any accrued interest for the month, and only whatever remains after interest is covered gets applied to the principal balance. If the calculated income-based payment is smaller than the interest accruing that month, which happens routinely for lower-income borrowers or those with larger loan balances relative to their income, none of the payment touches the principal at all, and the unpaid interest simply gets added to the balance instead. This is where an invisible mechanism called negative amortization takes over, one that most borrowers never see clearly explained when they first enroll in one of these plans. Negative amortization means the loan balance increases despite regular payments being made, because those payments are smaller than the interest accruing during the same period. A borrower earning a modest income relative to their loan balance can make every single required payment, precisely as instructed, for years, while watching their balance climb steadily higher the entire time, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because the plan was specifically designed to calculate payments based on what someone can afford right now, with no built-in guarantee that this affordable amount will ever exceed the interest accruing on a larger loan balance. There's a related invisible mechanism tied to how unpaid interest eventually gets treated on these balances, a process called capitalization. At certain trigger points, leaving an income-driven repayment plan, switching plans, or at the end of certain deferment or forbearance periods, any interest that accumulated but was never paid gets added directly to the loan's principal balance, permanently. Once interest capitalizes, it stops being tracked as a separate, unpaid interest line item and becomes part of the principal itself, which means future interest then gets calculated on this new, larger principal amount, effectively charging interest on previously unpaid interest. This compounding effect means a borrower who experiences negative amortization for several years, then capitalizes that accrued interest at some later point, can end up owing meaningfully more than their original loan amount, even after making years of on-time, plan-compliant payments the entire way through. Two real-world patterns make this concrete. Department of Education data on income-driven repayment enrollment has shown that a substantial share of borrowers in these plans experience balance growth rather than reduction in their early years of repayment, a pattern especially pronounced among borrowers with graduate school debt, where loan balances relative to post-graduation income tend to be highest immediately after finishing school. A second pattern shows up specifically around the loan forgiveness provisions built into these same income-driven plans, which typically forgive any remaining balance after 20 or 25 years of qualifying payments. Because of negative amortization, Some borrowers on track for eventual forgiveness see their balance rise substantially higher than their original loan amount over the qualifying period, which sounds alarming in isolation but is functionally irrelevant to their actual financial outcome if forgiveness ultimately occurs as planned, since the final balance amount, however large it grows, gets discharged entirely once the qualifying payment count is reached. This distinction between alarming on a statement and financially irrelevant to the actual outcome is precisely the gap that causes so much unnecessary anxiety among borrowers who were never given a clear enough explanation of how their specific plan was designed to work from the very beginning. This challenges the common assumption that a rising loan balance always signals a repayment plan that isn't working or a borrower falling behind on their obligations. In reality, for a specific structural category of loan repayment plan, a growing balance in the early years can be the fully expected, plan-compliant outcome for borrowers whose income doesn't yet exceed a certain threshold relative to their loan size, particularly when that plan is explicitly designed around an eventual forgiveness date rather than a full payoff date. The friction point isn't that these plans are secretly broken. It's that a growing balance in a plan that's technically working exactly as designed can look identical from the borrower's perspective, especially without a clear explanation up front about how these income-based calculations actually interact with accruing interest and eventual capitalization events. Zoom out. In this same structurally expected balance growth during compliant payments, pattern shows up in other lending products built around similarly non-standard payment structures. Certain adjustable-rate mortgages historically included negative amortization features explicitly, allowing borrowers to make a minimum payment lower than the interest accruing, with the shortfall added to the loan principal, a structure that received significant scrutiny after the 2008 financial crisis, specifically because many borrowers didn't fully understand the balance growth built into their specific loan terms. Certain credit card minimum payment structures function similarly at a smaller scale, where a minimum payment calculated as a small percentage of the balance can, in specific interest rate and balance combinations, barely cover accruing interest, meaningfully slowing progress even when payments are made consistently and on time every month. In every one of these cases, the surface-level behavior, a rising balance despite regular payments, looks identical to a borrower falling behind, even though the underlying cause and the borrower's actual compliance with the loan's terms are two completely separate things that simply happen to produce the same unsettling number on a statement. So the next time a student loan balance appears to grow despite years of consistent, on-time payments, it's worth remembering what that number actually represents within the specific plan structure it sits inside. It probably isn't a sign of a broken system or a borrower doing something incorrectly. It's more likely the mathematically predictable result of a payment calculated around current affordability rather than around the loan's underlying interest cost, operating exactly as its specific plan design intended. Whether that plan is ultimately building toward a distant forgiveness date or simply taking longer to show visible progress than the borrower's initial, reasonable expectations assumed it would.